Annie, an artist, is dealing with the death of her mother, with whom she had a very fraught relationship. Trying to put this behind her, focus on her work and her two children, Peter and Charlie, she's distracted by strange things that begin to happen following her mother's death. Hereditary is a proper horror. It's a real slow burn that builds up over time and really leaves you with a lingering impression of doom and fear. The writing is phenomenal, from the more emotional moments that Toni Collette delivers, which I think have had a lot of attention from critics, and quite rightly, all the way down to really realistic teen banter between young men. But what really stuck with me about the film was the way in which it built the world that it occupied with the emotional intensity and authenticity that it had. Hereditary deals with those typical genre trappings like demons and ghosts and stuff like that, but it does it in a really believable and authentic way that I don't think I could call realistic, because there's lots of moments in the film that almost break the fourth wall, but it certainly feels viscerally real world. There are no like over art directed satanic cult churches where there's lots of like demon writing on the walls and stuff and people are running around screaming and there's blood dripping down everywhere. The vast majority of the film takes place in community centres, schools, car parks, just these really typical middle American environments. And it's the entrance of something extraordinary and horrific into those environments that really gives the film a tension. The tension of the film right from the beginning is really extraordinary, and it builds up very slowly, like I said, until you reach this unbearable sort of like simmering scene where something truly horrific happens. I don't really want to spoil the film for people, but I'm going to have to if I'm going to talk about it in any depth. So unless you've seen Hereditary, please stop watching the video now. It's a film that you should not spoil for yourself. It'll be very good if you watch it not knowing much going in. About 30 minutes into Hereditary, we've seen a number of things that really kind of build the tension up. We have like the strange demons' names written on the walls. We have this odd like light flash that Charlie follows out to meet someone in the woods, but nothing really out there, nothing like James Wan distorted screaming faces and things like that. Peter goes to a party and is forced by Annie to bring along Charlie. She eats some nuts while she's there and starts to have an anaphylactic shock reaction. Peter's speeding the car, trying to drive her home, trying to get hold of her EpiPen, and Charlie puts her head out the window so that she can get some air. Peter swerves off the road to avoid an animal, and Charlie's head hits against like a transmission pole and decapitates her. What's phenomenal about that sequence is that they don't show you that actual decapitation. They avoid it really clinically and carefully. And instead we focus on the emotional reaction of Peter. He's obviously suffering from shock. He drives home, he goes into bed, and the next morning he wakes up and listens to his mum find her body. Annie is downstairs just screaming at Charlie's decapitated body. And then we cut to an incredibly gross close-up of Charlie's head decaying on the side of the road, covered in ants. And that sequence is one of the most astonishing and extraordinary set pieces I've ever seen in a horror film. I think it's completely phenomenal. After all that build-up, we were expecting something really extraordinary to happen, and in a sense there is something extraordinary to it. It seems pretty likely that the cult that's kind of orchestrating the events of the film has made that happen. In the end, the thing that happens is almost mundane. It's just like an accident that comes out of nowhere. And it's the terrifying truth of Hereditary and its sort of subtext as a horror film that real life is chaotic and scary and just constantly brings pain to you in a way that you can't control, and is to do with the actions of others in a way that you can never really stop. Yeah, spookier in a deeper sense than just like, I'm a teenager and I'm doing a game of truth or dare that's possessed by a demon. What's done really well in Hereditary that's often missed out by these sorts of films, by horrors, I think in general, is the emotional impact of the events on the people who are in it. It can be the case even in good horrors that are scary, that the main character's love interest or someone similar will die, and they'll have this really emotional reaction then, and then the rest of the film it seems like they just forgot about it. Hereditary really shocked me, not for the disturbing imagery that's in it, although there's a lot of it, and it's very creative, but more for the emotionally grueling experience of watching those characters suffer through the traumas that they're dealing with. And it's communicated phenomenally, both visually and through the writing. It's this sense that they are not in control of their own lives, that really everything is happening to them has been preordained and they don't have any power to stop it or make it better. Early on in the film we have a scene where Charlie's eating a bar of chocolate and her parents are worrying about whether or not it has nuts in it, so we know she has a nut allergy. A couple of scenes later she's at this party with Peter and we can see these teenagers just chopping walnuts on the sideboard, and it gets this really long lingering look. And it's the director just saying, here you are, this is what will happen. And that sort of directing, coupled with, I think, the visuals of the film, really give you that sense of them not being in control. Annie, the mother in the film, is an artist, and she works predominantly in miniatures, right? So she makes these little scenes that look like dolls' houses and kind of builds these tiny little details into her life. You can see she's desperately trying to retain control or create some when she grew up with this really abusive mum and this really difficult home life. So this becomes a visual metaphor for how we see control in the lives of the characters in the film. Later on in the film especially, the camera is often higher than the eye height of the characters and it's sideways on to the action. It's kind of moving sideways. It's just like you're looking into a diorama or a dollhouse that's been made by someone. And even beyond that, there are sometimes landscape scenes or wides in the film that are shot with a tilt-shift lens. This is a special lens that's used often in architectural work, but it makes basically big things look like miniatures. So you have a number of sequences that start off on a close-up of one of Annie's pieces, and then you have these wides that are actually the real world that are made to look like they're those miniatures, and you start to be confused about the boundaries between those two things. All of that gives you a sense that these characters are just small dolls moving through someone else's story that's been created for them. It's a little metafictional, but it's also stunningly deterministic, not something you see that often in films, and it's really well realised throughout the whole movie, both in the visuals and in the writing. We really get a sense these characters' lives are tiny and insignificant in some other story, that they are not in control of their lives, that they are not their own. Even down to little details like the first and last shot of the film essentially mirror each other, which gives you this idea that the whole thing was planned right from the start, which of course is how it turns out. So the writing's great, and the art direction with its focus on architecture, documents and artifacts is wonderful, and the acting of course is phenomenal. I mean, it's Toni, Collette, Gabriel, Byrne and Alex Wolff, who I think is a wonderful young actor who's really coming up in the world. But all of that stuff is slightly beside the point when it comes to horror. Arguably a horror should make you scared, just like a comedy should make you laugh. A really funny comedy, you leave the cinema and you want to tell your friends about it. A really scary horror film, you can't stop thinking about it, it keeps you up at night. And that's what happened to me with Hereditary. I saw it a couple of days ago, and both nights I've been, in my last moments before I go to sleep, thinking about that severed head and about Toni Collette flying around in the house at the end. Just these really scary, dreamlike images that populate the film. I got one on the screen behind me. What I liked about Hereditary's visuals and horror was the way that it drew a tension between these really dreamlike, almost hallucinatory visuals and the really realistic setting that it's in. It moves between the prosaic and the supernatural so quickly that it's really disorientating for the viewer. I think that's a really skilled thing that the director did. But I have said before that I don't like satanic horrors. I don't think that dealing with demons and devils is an interesting territory for films to cover. And I gotta say, Hereditary challenged that for me. I think this is a really good film and it was really scary. I guess my big problem with satanic horrors is they tend to be made by people who believe in Christianity or in a certain religion, and so as a result, they never really want to portray the demons as being capable of winning, because of course God's grace should win out in the end. Of course the other reason is that demons feel like an off-the-shelf horror. It's something that people say, well of course demons are scary. It's a demon. I can just tell you it's a demon and then you should be scared of it because you should understand it. But every film should establish its villains with real characteristics, specific motives and ideas, specific stuff about them in the way that they express themselves on screen visually or as a character. And so movies with demons, and I think James Wan is really guilty of this in his films, frequently fail to establish why I should be scared of a demon specifically. I mean, I know the demons are off killing people and throwing them around rooms and stuff, but why is that demon different from a ghost, say? What's the difference between those two things? Why is it scary? And I think that's one thing where Hereditary does an extremely good job. Paimon is inexplicable and horrific, but he's also specific. He is a real threat that feels realised in the world of the film. All the women who are part of his scheme end up beheaded. It mirrors an actual religious iconography, and I think that's a really wonderful bit of art direction, where they thought about, this is a demon, how would his followers worship him, and what specifically would that worship look like? How can we draw links between that and real satanic cults? Near the end of the film, Annie looks through a book of photographs of her mother kind of in the cult, and the ritual looks very real. It looks like something that people would actually do in these sorts of scenarios. So although Paimon is ultimately a very mysterious adversary who we really don't interact with directly in the film, he's given an air of credibility through the art direction because it's so specific. It feels like Paimon's worship is really part of the world in which the other characters live. And his cult members are not these ultra-powerful hooded figures who teleport around. They're mostly middle-aged to old people who live in the same small town where Annie and her family live. I kept comparing this weirdly to Deliver Us from Evil, the film of Eric Bana that's about demonic possession, and it just feels so much more generic. that movie. He's a stock demon with a weird distorted voice. There's a possession scene that's all about shouting and windows exploding. This film, on the other hand, felt like it built its own reality for the horrors that it had in its story to inhabit. And that's really rewarding for the viewer because you can notice these little details. Like as Peter and Charlie drive to the party, the camera stops on the transmission pole that would eventually decapitate Charlie. And the sigil for the cult is like scratched into that post. That's really wonderful art direction. You don't know what that symbol means at that time, but it really pays off later on when you find out what it is. If you remember that stuff, then it comes back to you and you go, right, okay, so the cult did that somehow. They kind of like manipulated that or something. It feels weird recommending that you go and see Hereditary because honestly, it kind of screwed me up for a couple of hours after I watched it. I felt physically sick. I was really stressed while watching the film. I was sweating, I had a dry mouth when I came out of it, and I couldn't stop thinking about those poor characters. I felt for them so much. But that's amazing, because film, like every other art, should induce a reaction in its audience, and Hereditary induced something so physical and real in me that I'm still feeling it a couple of days later. So I highly recommend you go and see this horrible, scary, sad film. It's very well made. But a warning, a fair warning, I think, to people who don't deal well with horrors. It really is very scary, so just, prep yourself before you go in. That's it from me. I'd love to find out what you thought about Hereditary down below. I have seen that there's a real disparity between the rave reviews that critics are giving to it and the pretty poor responses the audience is giving. I'm not sure if that's because of the marketing of the film that makes it out maybe as a more generic horror than the one that's ended up being there. But I think Hereditary is quite different to most horrors that are out at the moment, and I think that might throw some viewing audiences that think they would enjoy the film and end up not enjoying it. Either way, I'd love to find out what you thought, so please let me know in the comments down below. That's it from me. Have a good one. Bye for now.